Hi, it's Gatti. Today, I want to make a video about grass in terms of performance inside Unreal Engine. So basically here I have 8 static mesh, so they're all using different kind of technique to create the shape of the grass. And I basically want to go over all of them. I want to compare them in terms of performance, and I want to see that including nanite. So I want to compare using nanite and without using nanite. I want to compare them using cast shadow or not using cast shadow, and I want to compare them using world position offset. So in this case, wine effect, and without using world position offset. And so here we have 8 mesh, and so all of these mesh are using different techniques. So as you can see here, I have SM for static mesh because it's the first static mesh in the line. So this is whole one static mesh, and so this one does use a 1422 triangle. So basically, if I go in here, I jump in the static mesh. As you can see, LD0 does a 1422 triangle, and so this one has 3 LD. So what this means is I'm using in this case 3 LD. And opacity mask, it's so if I go in the material in here, as you can see, if I go in the texture of the base color and I turn off RGB, as you can see, the alpha channel is the opacity mask texture. And so I'm basically using that and plug that into the opacity mask. So I just go here and I change the blend mode to mask. And so I can put my alpha into the opacity mask. And what this does is I'm actually using the texture opacity mask to create the shape that I want on the grass. So in this case, I'm using opacity mask. And so in this one, so I try to recreate kind of like the same grass. So in this case, I do have more triangle. So I do have 4820 triangle. But if I go in wireframe, as you can see, all of the grass are made with geometry, basically. And so as you can see here in the material, I'm not using opacity mask. This is just opaque blend mode. And so the difference between this one and this one, it's basically this one does not use opacity mask and this one does. But this one has 2 LD, one at 4820 and one at I believe something like 2K. Yeah. And so this one, it is a single grass blade. And so in this case, I'm using opacity mask. So as you can see, so this one is basically the same static mesh, but this one does not use opacity mask and this one does. So this one has 32 triangle. So I'm trying to click on it. And as you can see, I do have 2 LD, so 32 triangle and 11 triangle. And so in this case, this one has the same LOD and the same triangle, but I'm just not using opacity mask. In this case, I'm not using opacity mask again, so I'm only using geometry. And I do have 3 LD, but this is a very low single blade grass. And I think I have 3 LD, but if I go in here, I think I went down to something like 2 triangle at LD2. Yes, I do. Okay, and so this one, so this is one of the static crush that I already covered in a tutorial. So in this case, I'm using this texture, and I'm just using this texture with alpha mask. So in this case, I will just open this texture, and as you can see, I'm using this opacity mask to create the shape of this low poly grass. And so here I have 36 triangle, and I have just no LD because it is the lowest triangle amount that I can have. And so in this case, it is basically the same static mesh, but in this case, I'm using opacity mask, but I try to fit more the geometry. This means, so if I remove that, so I'm just gonna remove the opacity mask, and I'm gonna go in here, and I'm gonna go in wireframe mode, like so. As you can see, I'm trying to fit more the shape of the grass. So as you probably know, Unreal doesn't like using too much of opacity mask, so it doesn't like to cut too much using the opacity mask. So in this case, in LD0, I do try to fit as much as I can the grass itself with the geometry. And so lastly, the static mesh. So this is a static grass that I download from Megascan. And so this one has 47 triangle, 57, 48 triangle, and this one has 3 LOD and is using opacity mask. But as you can see, because we have a lot of triangle, we do have the shape with basically the geometry, even though we're using the opacity mask. So I already did the landscape. I already just create a bit a shape, and I'm just using a very simple material. So I'm using just two, one for the slope and one for the grass. And so basically this material does not, I believe, impact my FPS. It is very cheap. So here I'm gonna go in my content folder. So in the folder that I created for this tutorial, I'm just gonna go in here and click on static mesh. Now I'm gonna go in foliage mode, and now I'm gonna take all of these. So using shift, and I'm just gonna save everything, and so import all of them. And so now we're gonna compare each one of these using nanites, world position offset, and cast shadow to compare all of them. So keep in mind that up here I do have a frame rate, and so right now I'm sitting in here, so right there, and I'm just gonna press Ctrl+1 to set this as a bookmark. So this means if I go here and I just press 1, I will still be at exactly the same spot watching the same direction. And so in here, I'm just going to take all of the grass, and I want to make sure that all of, the call distance is the same for all of them. So I'm going to just enter those values. So 15,000 for the min, and so the max will be at 25,000. Now I will keep just the same setting for all of them, like so. And now I'm just going to unselect all of them. And so we're going to start first with this one. So I'm using a brush size of 21,000. So as you can see here, I select this, it is this size, and so I'm using the page density of 0.5, and at first I'm gonna go with a density of 100 for this static mesh. So I'm gonna click on bookmark 1, and I will just paint like so. I will just press F10 and watch the FPS on the top right corner. So I'm getting around 64 FPS, so everything is recorded on my PC with a 3080 RTX and a i7 10700K. And now I'm gonna turn on enable nanite and preserve area. I will just check if cast shadow is enabled, and now I'm gonna hit play. And so I'm getting around 57 FPS. And so now I'm gonna turn off cast shadow, and I'm just gonna hit play, and as you can see I have around 70 FPS, and I'm basically gonna do this for non-nanite and nanite enable. Okay, so now I'm just gonna change the density, so I change from 100 to 300, and I will just do exactly the same, so enabling nanite, disabling nanite, and same for shadow with this density. And so lastly, I will just change the density to 500, and I will just repeat the process and keep all the result. And so yeah, so to compare all of them, I'm actually gonna repeat this whole process to all of the static mesh, except for static mesh 3, 4, and 5. So because they're single blade, I'm actually gonna increase the amount of density for those three. So I'm just gonna increase by 10 times. So I will just set the first one to be 1,000, the second one to be 3,000, and the last one to be 5,000. Okay, so after 2 hours, I finally got all the result from all the static mesh grass. And so I created this so we can compare better, depending on the type of mesh that we have, where we should use nanite or where we shouldn't use nanite. Okay, so I will try to, as fast as I can, explain this board that you see right there. So as you can see here, we have the static mesh. So which static mesh are we on about? Here we have alpha mask. So if we are in the static mesh using alpha mask or not. Here is a triangle amount that we have in a static mesh, and here is use mode. So it is basically if we are using mostly geometry or if we are using mostly mask. And so here we have the density. So for all of the static mesh, I use a 0.5 paintbrush, like I said, and a 21,000 brush size, and the same call distance for all of the static mesh. And so except for so these three, the single blade, so 03, 05, and 04 and 05, I use so I just 10 times the amount of density for all of them. And so so the test performance, we are watching FPS. So as you can see here in all of the board, we have FPS value. And so here we basically have no nanite. So here I'm testing with no nanite and shadow on. Here I'm testing with no nanite, so with cast shadow disable. And so here, right there, I'm using nanite with shadow, and here without shadow. And so basically here, if it's red, this means, so if I take this value, as you can see here, I will compare no nanite with shadow to nanite with shadow, and as you can see here, I'm getting 57 FPS, and as you can see here, I'm getting 55 FPS. So this is in red because nanite does perform better in this case than without nanite. Okay, so now we're gonna compare the two first static mesh. So static mesh 01 does use alpha mask, and static mesh 02 does not use alpha mask. And so this one has 1422 triangle, and this one has 4820 triangle. And so static mesh 2 only uses geometry, and this one does use mostly geometry, but does still use alpha mask. And so now we're gonna compare the result that we get from these two static mesh. Okay, so let's first compare nanites on static mesh 1. So here, as you can see, with no nanites, I have 55 FPS, 35, and 26, and here I have 57 with so nanite enable. I have 57, 36, and 28 FPS. And so first, one thing that we can see is that nanite does perform way better whenever we are using a static mesh. We use mostly geometry. And so here, the gap between those two are not that big. But if we watch static mesh 2, who does only use geometry and does not use alpha mask, as you can see here, we have 32 FPS, 14, and 9, which are very bad. So I would not recommend to use so a geometry mesh with high triangle without nanite. And so comparing this to this, so basically with nanite enable, we have 67 FPS, 52, and 44. And so as you can see there, we have way better performance compared to this, but not only this, but a way larger gap between those two. And I would say it is because we use alpha mask there. Because even though we have less triangle in this case with static mesh 1, we have way much better results only using geometry. Okay, so now let's compare single 03 and single 04. So to remind you, these two are just a single blade grass basically, and so this one does use alpha mask and this one does not, and so both are mostly using geometry, and they have the same triangle and they're pretty much the same static mesh. Okay, so as you can see here, with no nanite enable, I have pretty much the same result on both, even though one uses alpha mask and the other does not. We do have a little bit more performance with alpha mask on with a density of 1000. But yeah, here we have less, better performance compared to whenever we are enabling nanites and with seal shadow. As you can see, the gap between is pretty large between those two. Not too big, but it is still better. But I would not recommend anyway to use single blade because you run pretty quick to too many instances inside your scene. But let's talk about nanite with no shadow. As you can see there, we have better results compared to this one, and even compared to this one. So nanite does perform better than all the other case with a no shadow enable. So I would suggest to use no nanite whenever you want to use shadow, and if you don't want to use shadow, you can use nanite in the single blade case. But anyways, at the end of the video, we are gonna see how to pretty much have the same result as with no shadow enable. Okay, so I don't want to talk too much about so single blade 05 because we have pretty much the same result as those two. But as you can see here, because we have less triangle, whenever we are not using nanites, so in the case of shadow or no shadow, we have a bit more performance. As you can see here, with a density of 5000, I went from 48 to 54. But here, in the case of so nanites, we pretty much have the same result on both cases, so with shadow and no shadow. So I would see that nanite doesn't care about how much triangle you have, but whenever you're not using nanite, you do care about how much triangle that you have. Okay, so now let's talk about those two right here. So this one are different because I'm basically taking a screenshot inside SpeedTree of some grass that I just spread on the land, and I'm just taking a screenshot of it, and after that I'm just importing it back the screenshot, and I'm just creating just a set of grass with the screenshot that I took inside SpeedTree. And so even though I have the same density as the other one in the board right there, I would still think that visually I do have more density than the other. Okay, so keep in mind that, that these two static mesh are heavily using opacity, opacity mask or alpha mask to create the shape of the grass. And so let's talk about the result. So as you can see first, in general, we do have better performance using no nanites. And so in the case of no shadow or with shadow, we do have way better performance than using nanite. But as you can see, the overall result of the FPS that we got from the static mesh is less performant than the other. But I would say that having 500 density of those static mesh is visually way more dense than the other. Okay, so let's watch the nanite result for these two static mesh. So in this case, I'm watching here, so nanite with shadow, and as you can see, we have terrible frame rate from 28 to 10, and here 24 to 9. And so that just confirms what we saw lastly, is that nanite doesn't work well with the utilization of opacity mask or alpha mask. But what we can see is that whenever we turn off shadow, we start getting some pretty correct number, even though they're still worse than without nanites. We can see a big gap between with shadow and without shadow using nanites. And so we can conclude by saying that nanite doesn't like opacity mask, but it is even way worse using shadow. Okay, so let's now talk about this parameter that we have here. So as you can see here, I'm just turning off world position offset. And so I'm gonna watch this result. So 29 FPS to 37. So by just basically turning off world position offset, I went from 29 to 37. And if I turn off shadow, I went from 37 to 58. And so it is basically the same for this mesh as well. So 49 to 56 to 70, 32 to 39 to 62, and 25 to 33 to 57. And so one thing that we can see is that the impact on the world position offset is less than the impact on the shadow for this particular case. So of the static mesh using a lot of opacity mask. And so one other thing that we can see is that here, if I watch nanites, so I'm gonna watch these three results right there. So I went from 24 FPS to 24, here from 12 to 12, and here from 9 to 9. And it is exactly the same with the shadow. So all of these results are the same. And what this means is so for this static mesh, so using alpha mask, nanite does not really care about world position offset, because we are not getting any FPS between those two results, but only care about shadow. Okay, so now let's talk about the last static mesh. So the one from Megascan. So this one does as 5748 triangle. We do use alpha mask, but we're basically not using it. It is mostly, and I would say from 99% of this mesh, using geometry. And so let's watch the result right now. So as you can see, of course, as expected, non-nanites do a terrible job, especially when you have a lot of density on your scene. But it was expected, of course, because we have a lot of triangles, so of course nanite would perform way better in this case. And as you can see here, we start getting a lot of good results using nanite. As you can see, we have 58, 36, and 28 with shadow on, and here without shadow, we have a very good result for how much density that we have on the scene. So here 71, 62, and 56. And so keep in mind that the first two static mesh, they're pretty much the same as this one, so 08, because they're both using geometry to render. And so here, if I watch this result, so 58, 36, and 28, as you can see, if I compare, so with shadow and nanite enable to with shadow and nanite enable, but without world position offset, I'm getting 70, 62, and 57, which is way more higher than what we have here. So basically here, I have 500 density, which is a lot. And by just turning off world position offset, I have still 57 FPS with nanite enable on this particular mesh. But as you can see here, I'm pretty much sure I haven't done the test, but because the results are pretty similar to without shadow using nanite, I would say that this one would perform very well as well. As you can see here, we have 56 FPS. And so by just turning off world position offset, I went from 56 to 60. So I would say here, I would go from 65 to 60 anyway. And so let me introduce you to world position offset disable distance, which is a parameter that you can find inside the foliage mode. So as you can see here, if I change this and So I need to scroll down there. So in instance setting, I need to just open the advanced button right there. And as you can see here, I have the world position offset disable distance. And what this does is I can actually control so the distance where I want to use world position offset and where I don't want. So as you can see here, I have a value of 0. So I basically gonna have world position offset everywhere. It's set by default to 0. And if I increase that to 1000, as you can see, so it is in Unreal unit. So basically 1000, it's 10 meter. So as you can see here, I will no longer have world position offset after 10 meter, as you can see. And so it is from the camera. So of course, if I move, I will still have a wind effect close to me. And after 10 meter, I will not see any wind effect. As you already know now, a world position offset with nanites is a lot of cost. So to optimize our mesh, we can actually use this world position offset to actually optimizing our mesh and getting the most FPS as we can for our mesh. So here I have, as you can see, 58 FPS. And so if I turn off this to be 2500, which I believe in my eyes is a good range to this parameter, as you can see, I went from 60 to pretty much 80 FPS. So lastly, one thing that I want to cover. So like I said, I think this mesh, so the low poly mesh that we use, even though we are using a lowest density than the other. So let me explain you by showing you. So if I paint this with a density of 100, I think that we're getting visually the same density if I paint this to the Megascan with a 300 density. So the point that I want to cover right now is that so I only need to put a density of 100 to achieve the same visual density than the one from Megascan. So that's basically the last thing that I cover on the board is so comparing these two, and I actually compare this one, so static mesh 02, and compare it to the low poly one without the same density in terms of density in Unreal Engine, but with basically the same visual density. So here I'm just gonna paint like so. And here, as you can see, we have roughly about 105 FPS. And now I'm gonna go in here. I'm just gonna remove everything like so. Now I'm gonna unselect this, and I will take the Megascan mesh with 300 density. Now I will just paint the floor with it. And so as you can see here, I'm getting 83 FPS. And so lastly, I will do the same with the static mesh 02. So I'm gonna take this one, unselect this one, select this one, and paint it onto the landscape. And so as you can see here, I'm getting roughly about 100 FPS. And so all of these use 2500 as a world position offset disable distance. So all of them use the same, as you can see. And so the point that I want to show there is that even though I do have more density on those one, I think they have the same visual density, and so we're getting about the same frame, even though I'm getting, I think, a bit more frame with the low poly one. And so that's the point that I want to show, is that low poly mesh with opacity mask can work sometime better, so in this case, as we see, than nanite foliage. Alright, and that's it for this video. You will find the link to download the board on the description. And I will also do another video about tree this time. And so I will compare pretty much like I did for the grass, and do the same process for tree to compare with nanite and without nanite. And I hope to see you there. Bye.